In the windswept plains of Ghost Canyon, Arizona, legends aren't born from tall tales, but forged in gunsmoke and blood. Thomas Walker, at 45, knows more about silence than speech. His weathered hands, calloused from working his modest homestead, tell one story. The collection of notches on an old Colt revolver locked away in his cellar tells another. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. To the folks of Ghost Canyon Settlement, Thomas Walker is just another quiet veteran trying to make peace with his past. They see him at Mason's General Store, paying fair prices for simple supplies. They nod respectfully when he delivers fresh vegetables to the church gatherings, and appreciate his carpentry skills when the schoolhouse needs repairs. Few notice how his eyes constantly scan doorways and windows, or why drifters suddenly find urgent business elsewhere when he's around. The townsfolk whisper about his past, spinning tales with more imagination than truth. Some say he fought in the border wars, others claim he rode with the Texas Rangers. A few even whisper he might have been a notorious gunslinger, though they never say such things within his earshot. Walker never confirms nor denies, letting their speculation fade into background noise like the desert wind. What they don't know is why the local Apache gave his homestead a wide berth, or why his fence posts have peculiar notches at precise intervals. They don't see how he practices at dawn, maintaining skills that should have rusted away years ago. Most importantly, they never notice the careful way he positions himself in every room. Back to the wall, eyes on the door, always within reach. Over weapon. When the morning sun paints the Arizona sky blood red, Walker's already awake. His daily routine is methodical, almost military in its precision. The horses need feeding, the crops want tending, and a custom-made Colt Patterson revolver requires its daily maintenance. The weapon, kept wrapped in waxed cloth beneath loose floorboards, gleams with deadly promise in the dawn light. Each morning he cleans it with the same care others might show a family heirloom. Few remember that 15 years ago, a legendary gunfighter known as Ghost Hand, Walker terrorized the territories from New Mexico to California. His speed was supernatural, his accuracy uncanny. They said he could draw and fire before a man's hand touched leather, that he could shoot the flame off a candle at 30 paces. The stories grew with each telling. How he'd outdrawn 4 men in Dodge City, how he'd killed a charging grizzly with a single shot between the eyes, how bullets seemed to curve around him like he truly was a ghost. Then, after a bloody showdown, in Tombstone that left 7 men dead, Ghost Hand vanished like morning mist. The stories continued, but the man himself became a phantom, spoken of in saloons and around campfires but never seen. Some said he'd been killed by bounty hunters, others claimed he'd fled to Mexico. The truth, as usual, was both simpler and more complex. Only Sheriff Marcus Reed knows why Walker chose Ghost Canyon to disappear. "Your secret's safe," he'd said 5 years back, helping Walker establish his homestead. "Though I reckon it's a waste. Best gun hand I ever saw, man or beast." The sheriff understood something about Walker that others missed. The weariness in his eyes wasn't just from working the land, but from carrying the weight of too many dead men's memories. This morning, like every morning, Walker checks the headlines in the week-old newspaper Reed brings by. Reports of the Blackwood gang moving south catch his eye. The notorious Outlaws have been raiding settlements, burning farms, and leaving no witnesses. 3 families dead in New Mexico already. The gang has a reputation for cruelty, forcing victims to beg before killing them anyway. They, particularly, enjoy targeting those who seem defenseless: elderly farmers, widows, men who look too broken to fight back. Walker's fingers brush against his hidden revolver as he reads, muscle memory recalling the weight and balance. His mind drifts to another time, when the weapon was as much a part of him as his own hand. A sound draws his attention, hoof beats approaching. Through his window, he spots 4 riders crossing the creek that marks his property line. Their horses are lean and trail-hardened, their riders wearing dusters despite the Arizona heat, not the usual traders or travelers who occasionally pass through Ghost Canyon. Walker quickly adjusts his worn leather vest, smoothing his graying hair slightly. The man who steps onto his porch bears little resemblance to the legendary Ghost Hand. Instead, he presents the perfect picture of a tired homesteader, though his keen eyes have already counted weapons, noted firing positions, and marked the leader, a brutish man with a distinctive red bandana and a silver-studded gun belt. The Blackwood gang has arrived in Ghost Canyon, and they have no idea they're about to meet a ghost from their own violent past. "Morning," the gang leader calls out, his voice carrying a practiced friendliness that doesn't reach his cold eyes. "Fine spread you got here, old-timer. Bit remote, though. Must be hard managing all alone." Walker clutches his water bucket closer, letting his hands tremble just enough to be noticed. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" His voice carries the weariness of age, carefully masking decades of command. The leader removes his hat, revealing a shock of black hair streaked with premature gray. "Name's James Blackwood, friend. My associates and I are travelers, interested in local history." He dismounts, spurs jingling against the packed earth. "Now something interesting caught our attention. Heard tell this valley used to be home to quite the gunman. Ghost Hand Walker, if memory serves." Blackwood's hand drifts toward his holstered revolver. "Funny thing is, we heard he might have settled somewhere in these parts. Men like that probably kept some souvenirs. That custom Colt of his would be worth plenty to collectors." Walker's sharp intake of breath isn't entirely feigned. "Ghost Hand Walker? That's just campfire stories. I'm just a tired veteran trying to work my land." Blackwood's laugh is sharp as a rattler's warning. "Stories? I was in Tombstone that day, old man. Watched him gun down 7 men like they were standing still. No one moves that fast without years of practice. Kind of skill that doesn't just disappear." The other riders have spread out in a loose circle around the porch. Walker counts 4 total, marking their positions while maintaining his facade of nervous age. He recognizes their pattern from the newspaper reports. The same formation they used at the Martinez farm before the killing started. "I'm afraid you've wasted your time," Walker says, his voice carefully uncertain. "Army took all my old war gear when I mustered out. Regulations, they said." It's a lie, of course. The Colt is still hidden away, along with enough ammunition to hold off a small army. Old habits die hard. "Boss," the youngest gang member, barely more than a boy with sun-bleached hair, calls out, "Found some interesting marks behind the barn. Bullet holes, precise patterns. Someone's been practicing." Blackwood studies Walker, something predatory entering his gaze. "That right? Been keeping your skills sharp, old-timer? Or should I say, ghost hand? Just for the coyotes," Walker stammers, mind racing ahead like a well-oiled cylinder. "Army taught me the basics, but I'm hardly any good anymore. Can't shoot worth spit beyond 20 paces, truth be told." The gang leader studies him for a long moment, then smiles, a killer's smile. "Tell you what," he pulls a playing card from his vest pocket, the ace of spades. "Standard carnival game. Hit it at 30 paces and we'll ride on. No trouble." His voice drops an octave. "Miss, and well, let's just say we'll need to discuss proper compensation for our wasted time. Men in these parts need protection after all." Walker lets his lower lip tremble. "I really couldn't. Oh, but I insist." Blackwood's hand now rests openly on his. "Gun. Consider it a friendly competition. Show us what an old veteran can do." Walker glances at the hidden floorboard concealing his Colt, remembering countless dawn practice sessions. The weight of years seems to lift slightly as muscle memory stirs. I'll need a gun," he says, voice deliberately uncertain. Blackwood nods to the young rider. "Escort the gentleman, Billy. Make sure he doesn't try anything foolish." As Walker leads Billy into the house, he notices details that would have gotten the boy killed in his ghost hand days. How his gun belt rides too low, how his eyes dart nervously around the room instead of maintaining focus. Rookie mistakes that get men killed in real gunfights. The Colt lies beneath the loose floorboard, exactly where it's rested since Walker came to Ghost Canyon. He reaches for it with deliberate awkwardness, making a show of nearly dropping it. Billy steps forward to help, just as Walker had anticipated. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Careful there, old-timer," he says, taking the revolver. "That's a mighty fine weapon. Custom work, if I'm not mistaken." "Army issue," Walker murmurs, letting Billy examine it while he secretly palms extra rounds from the hidden compartment. Rounds he'd crafted himself, perfectly weighted for the kind of trick shots that had made Ghost Hand Walker a legend. "Just an old service weapon." "This is no Army Colt," Billy says softly, running his fingers along the inscribed barrel. "I've seen pictures of Ghost Hand's gun, the custom grip, the modified sight." He trails off, then seems to remember his role. His expression hardens. "Come on, boss is waiting." Blackwood and his men have arranged themselves in a loose semicircle, the ace of spades fluttering on a fence post exactly 30 paces away. An insultingly easy shot for Ghost Hand Walker. He'd hit playing cards at 3 times that distance. In his prime. "Remember," Blackwood calls out, "hit the card and we ride on." His hand pats his revolver meaningfully. "Miss, and we'll need to discuss other arrangements." Walker makes a show of fumbling with the Colt, deliberately holding it. "Wrong. Stock not quite seated, stance slightly off." His inner voice, hardened by years of gunfights, screams at the improper form. He squeezes the trigger. The shot goes wide, splintering the fence post 6 inches to the right of the card. Laughter erupts from the gang. "Looks like you'll be needing that protection after all, old man," Blackwood says, starting forward. "Wait," Walker calls quickly, letting age creep into his voice. "In the Army, they always gave us 3 shots for practice." He lets his eyes fill with fear. "Please." Blackwood pauses, then spreads his arms magnanimously. "Well, boys, what do you say? Should we give the old-timer a sporting chance?" The gang grins and nods, clearly enjoying the show. Only Billy looks uncomfortable, still holding the gun case he'd carried from the house. Walker takes a second shot, this one hitting the fence post on the left side of the card. Closer, but still a clear miss. "Last chance, old man," Blackwood calls out. "Better make it count." Walker takes a deep breath, centers himself, and remembers his years in the territories. Sometimes he'd learned the best shot is the one they never see coming. In one fluid motion, he shifts his stance, feet planted perfectly, Colt tucked tight against his hip in the distinctive style that had made Ghost Hand Walker famous. Before the gang can register the change, he squeezes the trigger. The ace of spades doesn't just fall, it splits perfectly down the middle, both halves fluttering in the morning breeze. The morning air crackles with tension as the shredded pieces of the playing card drift to the ground. For 3 heartbeats, no one moves. Then Blackwood's hand flashes toward his revolver. "I wouldn't," Walker says, his voice transformed. Gone is the trembling veteran, replaced by something harder, forged in 100 gunfights. "I can put a bullet through your gun hand before you clear leather. And unlike that playing card, I won't need 3 tries." The gang freezes, their confident smirks replaced by dawning recognition as they realize their situation. Thomas Walker stands before them, transformed, every line of his body radiating the deadly grace that had made Ghost Hand a legend. "You played us," Blackwood says, face twisted with rage. "Learned long ago," Walker replies, keeping the Colt trained on him while remaining aware of the others' positions. "Sometimes the best advantage is the one they give you themselves." His eyes flicker to the others. "Hands where I can see them." "Gentlemen, Billy, collect their gun belts." The young outlaw hesitates, looking between Walker and his boss. In that moment of indecision, one of the other men, a weathered character with a twisted scar running down his neck, makes his move. His hand drops to his holster, but before he can grip his weapon, Walker's Colt cracks. The man's hat flies off, a neat hole punched through its crown. "That was a warning," Walker says calmly, the Colt already back on Blackwood. "The next one goes lower. Billy, the gun belts, please." This time Billy moves, carefully collecting weapons from his stunned companions. Walker notes how he handles the task efficiently, with a familiarity that suggests he knows more about proper gun handling than his nervous demeanor implied. "You won't get away with this," Blackwood growls, though he keeps his hands carefully visible. "You're just one old man. We have friends, allies all through these territories. They'll come looking." "You mean the rest of the Blackwood gang?" Walker's question makes him blink in surprise. "The ones terrorizing settlements across New Mexico? Burning farms, killing families, running those shooting contests of yours?" He allows himself a small smile at their shocked expressions. "Did you think my army days only taught me how to shoot? I read signs, spot patterns. I've known you were coming for days. Sheriff Reed's been watching the valley since yesterday." "You're bluffing," Blackwood says, but there's a note of uncertainty in his voice. "Am I?" Walker keeps his tone level, the same way he used to when facing down multiple opponents. "The same way I was bluffing about not being able to shoot." He addresses the group again. "You men have a choice to make. The smart one would be to surrender peacefully, face the law's judgment for your crimes. The other choice," he leaves. "The threat unspoken, letting them fill in the details. Hell, you can't watch all of us," Scarneck snarls, his hand twitching toward where his gun should have been. 43, Walker interrupts. "What?" 43 consecutive kills in the Dodge City Showdown, summer of '68. They thought I was just another bounty hunter. Had my hair dyed black then? Wore different clothes? His eyes lock onto Scarneck. "Would you like to test whether I've improved since then?" The revelation hits them hard. The Dodge City massacre was legendary in outlaw circles. Walker sees the moment the fight goes out of them, replaced by the dawning realization that they aren't facing some broken-down veteran, but rather a shooter whose skills might surpass even the legends. "You really are him," Billy says quietly as he returns with the rope. There's something like admiration in his young face. "Ghost Hand would have killed us all by now," Walker replies, a touch of sadness in his voice. "I'm trying to be someone different, but I'll finish what others start." He raises his voice. "On your knees, gentlemen, hands behind your backs. Billy, start with your boss." With the Blackwood gang secured, all except Billy, whom Walker keeps separate from the others, he faces a new challenge. Ghost Canyon's Maine. Settlement is still 5 miles away, and he needs to get word to Sheriff Reed. He can't risk moving the prisoners alone. "Billy," he calls, keeping his rifle trained on the others, "bring me my saddlebags from the barn." The young man moves quickly, eager to prove his cooperation. Walker has seen something in him, a chance for redemption that reminds him of his own past, of young men he'd helped guide away from violence during his Ghost Hand days. "You're making a mistake trusting that boy," Blackwood says from where he kneels, hands bound behind him. "Billy's one of us." "Funny thing about trust," Walker replies, watching Billy disappear into the barn. "My old commander used to say it's like a loaded gun. You have to read its signs, understand its nature. Right now, I trust Billy more than I trust you." He keeps his voice steady, though his arms are beginning to tire from holding the Colt, which isn't saying much. Scarneck spits in the dust. "Ghost Hand ain't here no more, old man. All your fancy shooting won't help when—" He stops abruptly as Walker's Colt shifts slightly in his direction. "When what?" Walker asks softly. "When the rest of our boys come looking, the ones you think Sheriff Reed's watching." Walker allows himself a small smile. "Let me share another lesson from my Ghost Hand days. The best surprise is one you plan yourself." Before anyone can respond, a shot rings out from the direction of the valley road. Walker's colt snaps toward the sound, but he quickly relaxes as he recognizes the signal. 3 short whistles followed by a long one, an old army call he and Reed had agreed upon. "Right on time," he murmurs, then raises his voice. "Over here, Sheriff!" Sheriff Marcus Reed rides into view, leading 3 deputies and 5 bound prisoners, more members of the Blackwood gang. The sheriff's usually pristine moustache is dusty from the ride, but his eyes twinkle with satisfaction as he takes in the scene before him. "Well now, Mr. Walker," he says, dismounting smoothly, "it seems you've been busy this morning." He nods to Blackwood. "James Blackwood, been wanting to have a word with you about that mess over in Silver Springs County." "Sheriff," Walker acknowledges, finally allowing his colt to lower slightly. "I see you found their camp just where we thought it would be." Bradley turns to his deputies. "Boys, secure these gentlemen with the others. We'll need the wagon from town to transport them all." The best shots, Walker thinks, are the ones you prepare for. The rest, those are the ones that make legends. As the deputies move to comply, Billy emerges from the barn with the saddlebags. He stops short at seeing the new arrivals, but Walker gestures him forward. "It's all right, Billy. Bring them here." The sheriff raises an eyebrow at his treatment of the young outlaw but says nothing. He's known Walker long enough to trust his judgment. From the saddlebags, Walker withdraws a packet of papers, carefully detailed maps and notes about the Blackwood gang's movements that he'd been compiling for weeks. Their whole operation, he explains, handing the papers to Reed. "Hideouts, supply caches, everything I could piece together from tracking them and listening to trail gossip." "You've been planning this," Blackwood says, comprehension dawning on his scarred face. "All of it, the frightened veteran act, the missed shots." "The frightened veteran is what everyone in Ghost Canyon expects to see," Walker replies. "It's amazing what people will say around someone they don't consider a threat." He turns back to the sheriff. "There's more. They weren't just planning to rob isolated homesteads." "Show him, Billy." The young man hesitates, then reaches into his vest and withdraws a folded paper. "Full plans for hitting 3 settlements at once," he says quietly. "Ghost Canyon, Silver Creek, and Dead Man's Pass. We had men placed in each area for weeks, learning patterns, making friends with the locals." Reed whistles softly as he reviews the plans. "This would have been the biggest raid in territorial history." He looks at Billy thoughtfully. "You're being mighty helpful, son." "Billy's been looking for a way out for months," Walker says before the young man can respond. "Haven't you, Billy? That's why you left those tracks by my creek 2 days ago, clear as signposts to anyone who knew how to read them. You wanted to be caught." The young man's shoulders slump in relief at having his secret finally spoken aloud. "They killed a family in Silver Springs," he says softly. "It wasn't supposed to happen. Blackwood said no killing, but then Scar got trigger happy and—" He shakes his head. "I tried to leave after that, but they said they'd hunt me down." "Nobody's hunting you now, son," Reed says, but his eyes are on Walker. "Mr. Walker, I don't suppose you'd be interested in a deputy's badge. Territory could use a shot like you." Walker shakes his head, smiling. "My place is here, Sheriff. The homestead needs me." He pauses, then adds, "But if you're looking for new deputies, might I suggest someone who knows the gang's operations? From the inside? Someone young enough to learn a better way?" Billy's head snaps up, hope warring with disbelief on his face. Scarneck laughs harshly. "You're both fools. This ain't one of them dime novel stories where everything works out neat and pretty. Real life ain't like that." "No," Walker agrees, thinking of his years as ghost hand, of long hours spent practicing alone, of a lifetime playing roles while keeping his skills sharp. "Real life is harder, messier. That's why we need people willing to take chances on doing what's right." But as Walker watches the deputies leading the gang away, he can't shake the feeling that this victory, impressive as it is, might be just the beginning. Blackwood's words about allies and friends echo in his mind. Something tells him that the Blackwood gang is just one piece of a much larger story, one that might force Ghost Hand to emerge from the shadows once again. He touches his Colt, feeling the familiar smoothness of its grip. Whatever comes next, he'll be ready. After all, as his commander used to say during the war, the best surprise is one you plan yourself. Blackwood glances back at him as he's led away, his eyes holding a warning. You've made powerful enemies today, old man. Men who won't take kindly to having their plans disrupted. Men who make the Blackwood gang look like children, playing at being outlaws. Walker meets his gaze steadily, then speaks quietly. Then they'll learn what you learned today. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the valley isn't who you'd expect. The sun climbs higher over Ghost Canyon as Thomas Walker stands on his porch, watching the dust settle in the wake of the departing prisoners. The quiet veteran who tends his garden and repairs the schoolhouse has revealed himself as something else entirely. The question now is what comes next. Word of Walker's showdown with the Blackwood gang spreads through Ghost Canyon like wildfire. By sundown, the quiet homesteader who always helped repair the church fence has become something else entirely in the eyes of the territory. Walker stands at his kitchen window, watching the sun paint the valley in shades of purple and gold, wondering what his old commander would think of how things had changed in just one day. The Colt has returned to its place beneath the floorboards, but its presence feels different now, less a secret, more a statement. They're calling you the Valley's guardian in town, Sheriff Reed says, accepting a cup of coffee at Walker's kitchen table. He's returned after securing the prisoners in the town jail, bringing news of the territory's reaction. Though some of the old-timers are saying they knew all along. Mrs. Peterson swears she saw you practicing quick draws behind your barn last spring. Mrs. Peterson needs stronger spectacles, Walker replied dryly. I haven't practiced behind the barn since winter. He sits across from Reed, his legendary Colt now more symbol than secret. How are the prisoners settling in? Quiet, mostly, except for Blackwood. He's been demanding to speak with territorial authorities, claiming he has information about bigger operations. Reed strokes his moustache thoughtfully. Billy's been helpful, though. Boy knows more about outlaw operations across 3 territories than most lawmen. Before Walker can respond, a knock at the door makes him tense, hand instinctively, moving toward the hidden Colt. Reed shakes his head. That'll be Martha, he says. My wife insisted on bringing you a pie. Says it's not right for you to be out here alone now that everyone knows. Walker opens the door to find not just Martha Reed, but half the town's women's. Auxiliary crowded onto his porch, led by the formidable Mrs. Peterson herself. The women sweep into his kitchen, bringing with them pies, casseroles, and an overwhelming wave of chatter. To think, Mrs. Peterson says, arranging her casserole on Walker's counter, all this time we've been treating you like a harmless old veteran who needed looking after when you were really... She trails off, seemingly unsure how to categorize. A man whose shooting prowess had become territorial legend. I'm still the same person, Walker says firmly, accepting yet another pie. Nothing's changed except what you know about me. But dear, Mrs. Peterson interjects, everything's changed. Why, just today, Mrs. Thompson was saying her James might be interested in having you teach him shooting. A man with your talents would be quite the instructor for the young men in town. Walker suppresses a sigh. This was exactly what he'd feared. His carefully maintained privacy crumbling under the weight of public interest. I'm not looking to teach anyone, Mrs. Peterson, he says. The homestead keeps me busy enough. Nonsense, the older woman declares. A man your age needs to think about passing on his knowledge. Why, with your skills, you could have your pick of students in the territory. The other women titter, but Walker notices some nodding in agreement. He thinks of his years as Ghost, and wondering what these proper town ladies would make of the full truth about his past. Another knock at the door interrupts his thoughts. This time it's Reverend Clark, accompanied by several members of the town council. Mr. Walker, he says, Solemnly, we've been discussing the matter of town security. Walker had been helping train the town's night watchman, a role he'd enjoyed precisely because it let him be useful while maintaining his quiet reputation. Now he sees in the Reverend's expression that this too might change. Perhaps, Reverend Clark continues, given recent events, you might consider taking a more active role in protecting our community. Now see here, Reverend Clark, Mrs. Peterson cuts in, her maternal instincts flaring. Just because Mr. Walker can handle a gun doesn't mean he needs to be the town's protector. Man's earned his peace. As the argument grows, Walker slips out onto his porch, leaving the voices behind. The evening air is cool, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. He thinks of his commander's words about the price of skill, not just in the hours of practice, but in how it changed how others saw you. A movement in the tree line catches his eye. Billy emerges slowly, wearing his new deputy's badge but looking nervous. "Mr. Walker," he calls softly, holding his hands where they can be seen. "Sheriff Reed sent me. There's trouble." Walker gestures to him inside, noting how the young man carries himself differently now, straighter, more purposeful. "What kind of trouble?" "Two men rode into town last night," Billy explains, accepting a cup of coffee with shaking hands. "Brothers named Clayton. They're not like the Blackwoods. They're professionals. Used to ride with the Iron Horse outfit before it fell apart." He pauses, gathering his thoughts. "They're asking questions about you." "What kind of questions?" "About your shooting, mostly. Whether the stories are true." Billy's hands steady as he continues. "But that's not the worst part. This morning we found this nailed to the jail door." He withdraws a crumpled paper from his vest. The message is crude but clear. "Tell the old man to watch his back. The Blackwood gang was just the beginning. P.S. That custom Colt of his, it belongs to someone else now." "Charming," Walker says dryly, though his mind is already racing through implications and possibilities. "How many men do they have?" "At least 30 from what I've seen," Billy replies. "They're professionals, Mr. Walker, not like our outfit. These men are killers." "All men with guns are killers, Billy," Walker says, echoing his commander. "The question is what they kill for." He studies the young deputy. "Sheriff Reed knows you came to warn me." Billy nods. "He's organizing the townsmen, but—" He hesitates. "But what? Most of them can barely hit a barn door at 10 paces. And the Clayton brothers, they've got a reputation. They say Luke Clayton once shot a silver dollar out of the air at 50 yards. Walker allows himself a small smile. "Impressive, though I notice the story doesn't mention how many tries it took him." He stands, moving to the window to scan the surrounding countryside. "Tell me about their patterns. How do they operate?" As Billy details what he knows, Walker listens with the same intensity he'd once applied to tracking outlaws. "The Clayton brothers are methodical," the young deputy explains. "They like to create chaos as a distraction, then strike at their real target while authorities are occupied elsewhere. They'll try to split the town's defenses," Walker muses. "Hit multiple locations at once. Standard strategy for a smaller force against a defended position." He turns back to Billy. "How many deputies does the sheriff have now?" 4, counting me." Billy's face flushes slightly. "Though I'm not sure how much help I'll be in a real fight." "You'd be surprised," Walker says, studying him thoughtfully. "Sometimes the best fighters are the ones who understand what they're risking." He pauses, considering his next words carefully. "What do you know about trick shooting, Billy?" "Really no, not just what you picked up with the Blackwoods. My pa taught me some," Billy replies, straightening slightly. "Proper stance, breathing, trigger control. I can hit what I aim for most of the time." "Good," Walker says, moving to the floorboard and taking out his Colt. Lesson 1. A gun is just a tool. It's the mind behind it that matters. For the next hour, he drills Billy in the basics, correcting his form, teaching him the small details that separate a good shot from a great one. The young deputy proves an eager student, soaking up knowledge like dry earth in a rainstorm. Sheriff Reed needs to know about their likely strategies, Walker says finally, as Billy practices his breathing. But he also needs to understand something else. The Clayton brothers aren't here just for Blackwood. Billy lowers the practice pistol, comprehension dawning. They're here for you. My reputation makes me a threat, Walker finishes, or an opportunity. Either way, they'll want to prove themselves against the man who took down the Blackwood gang. We should warn the sheriff, Billy says, his young face hardening with determination. Get more men out here to defend the homestead. Walker shakes. His head, a plan already forming. No, we're going to give them exactly what they want, but on our terms. He smiles, and for a moment Billy sees in his expression the same calculating look that had preceded the Blackwood gang's capture. Tell me, Deputy, how comfortable are you playing scared? By morning, Walker's homestead had transformed into a carefully orchestrated stage. Every detail is arranged with deliberate precision, learned from years of setting traps during his ghost hand days. Remember, he tells Billy as they make final preparations, the Clayton brothers will be watching. Everything we do needs to sell. The story. He adjusts a chair on his porch, positioning it to catch the afternoon sun. They need to believe I'm scared, overwhelmed by their reputation. Billy nods, his new deputy's badge catching the light. He'd spent the last hour helping Walker move hay bales and ranch equipment, positioning each piece to provide cover or channel movement exactly where Walker wanted it. To untrained eyes, it would look like normal ranch work. To professionals, like the Clayton brothers, it might seem like amateur attempts at fortification. What if they don't take the bait? Billy asks, wiping sweat from his brow. These men aren't like Blackwood and the others. They won't underestimate you just because you look old. No, Walker agrees, checking sightlines from various positions. They'll underestimate me because they think they know what I can do. He smiles slightly. After all, they've heard the stories. 3 shots to hit a playing card, lucky timing with the Blackwood gang. They'll be expecting a retired gunslinger, with some natural talent left, not ghost hand at his prime. Billy finishes his task, understanding dawning on his young face. But won't they be suspicious? All this preparation. That's why you're going to ride into town, Walker explains, looking worried and asking for help. Tell the sheriff exactly what we discussed. Make sure everyone hears you, especially any strangers hanging around the saloon. Mr. Walker is scared, Billy recites. Says he got threatening notes. Wants protection but doesn't trust himself to handle trouble like the Clayton brothers. You're laying a trail, Walker says admiringly, just like those false tracks you used to set for the Blackwoods. People see what they expect to see, the young deputy agrees, quoting one of Walker's lessons. The trick is making them expect the wrong thing. Walker pauses, studying his protege. Are you sure about your part in this? It'll be dangerous. Billy straightens, his hand touching his badge. I owe you, Mr. Walker, not just for giving me a chance, but for showing me there's more than one way to be brave. He manages a grin. Besides, I've gotten pretty good at playing scared. Walker nods, satisfied. Good. Now remember, when you ride back with the sheriff's protection, make sure to take the South Trail. We need them to think we're focused on defending from that direction. As Billy mounts up, Walker adds one last detail, a white handkerchief accidentally dropped near the water trough where it will flutter nervously in the breeze. A small touch, but one that suggests fear and uncertainty. Once Billy has ridden, off Walker begins the next phase of his preparation. He cleans his Colt meticulously, but leaves it conspicuously displayed on the porch, another prop in his performance. The real preparation happens in the root cellar, where he uncovers a hidden cache of weapons he'd maintained from his ghost hand days. Among them is a specially modified Winchester rifle, a weapon few would expect and even fewer could use effectively. "The best shot," he whispers, reciting his commander's lesson, "is the one they never see coming." As he works, Walker reflects on how his life has changed in just 2 days. The quiet facade he'd maintained for years had crumbled, replaced by a growing legend that draws dangerous men like moths to flame. Part of him mourns that loss of anonymity, but another part, the part that had always thrilled to the challenge, of a shootout, feels oddly liberated. He thinks of Mrs. Peterson and the Women's Auxiliary, of Reverend Clark and his concerns about town security. Their world of social calls and proper behavior seems very far away now, yet Walker knows that world is worth protecting, even if he can never fully belong to it again. By early afternoon, everything is in place. Walker sits on his porch, apparently absorbed in whittling, but actually counting riders moving through the distant trees. He's spotted 12 so far, carefully hidden but visible to eyes trained by years of gunfights. "Nice and predictable," he murmurs, noting their positions. The Clayton brothers are professionals, which means they'll follow certain patterns. They'll watch, plan, and wait for darkness. They'll expect him to be nervous, to make mistakes. Most importantly, they'll expect him to think like a retired gunman, playing at being a warrior, not a warrior who'd spent years playing at being retired. Through his kitchen window, he spots another rider approaching, Billy returning with Sheriff Reed and 2 deputies. Their arrival is perfectly timed, just as he'd counted on the Clayton brothers' scouts witnessing. "Remember," he told Billy earlier, "they need to see the law's protection arriving. Make it obvious. Make it look like we're scared and doing everything wrong." The performance that follows would have done credit to any theater troupe. Sheriff Reed, understanding his role perfectly, makes a show of posting his men in conspicuous positions around Walker's homestead. Walker stands on his porch, wringing his hands and jumping at small noises, a convincing portrayal of a man unnerved by threats. "They're watching," Billy murmurs as he helps Walker carry water to the horses. 2 in the North Grove, another by the Old Oak. "They're trying to stay hidden, but I know every hiding spot within a mile of this homestead," Walker finishes, keeping his voice low and his manner anxious for their audience. "Have you seen the brothers themselves?" Luke Clayton was in the saloon when I rode in, Billy reports. Tall man, expensive clothes, matching Colts worn low. His brother Mark was watching from the hotel. "They're exactly like their reputation, cool, professional." Walker nods, noting how Billy's description matches what he'd expected. The Clayton brothers had survived this long by being methodical, by never underestimating their opponents. That very professionalism would be their undoing. As dusk approaches, Sheriff Reed makes a show of organizing the defense. He posts deputies at obvious points, the front door, the barn, the water trough, all places that experienced gunmen would expect law enforcement to guard, and all places Walker has carefully prepared to be ultimately irrelevant. "They'll come tonight," Reed says loudly, for the benefit of any watching ears. "Mr. Walker, you stay inside where it's safe. We'll handle this." Walker plays his part, protesting, weakly before allowing himself to be convinced. As he steps inside, he catches Billy's eye and gives an almost imperceptible nod. The young deputy immediately begins acting nervous, checking and rechecking his gun with shaking hands. Inside the homestead, Walker moves with silent efficiency. He extinguishes lamps in a pattern that suggests a normal evening routine, but leaves one burning near a window, creating a perfect backlit target for anyone watching. Then he slips into the root cellar through a hidden trapdoor beneath the kitchen rug. The cellar had been his pride during his ghost hand days, a carefully constructed bunker with concealed shooting ports disguised as ordinary foundation vents. From here, he can see approaches that their watchers think are blind spots. More importantly, he can move through a series of tunnels he'd built, emerging at key points around the property. "A good scout," he whispers, recalling his commanders. "Lessons always has an escape route. A great scout makes sure those routes can work in both directions." As true darkness falls, Walker watches through one of the ports as shadows move at the edge of his property. The Clayton brothers' men are good. They move with discipline, maintaining formation even in the dark. He counts 30 altogether, more than Billy had estimated. They've gathered reinforcements. Through another port, he sees Billy pacing nervously on the porch, playing his role perfectly. The young deputy had taken to strategy like a natural, understanding instinctively how to appear both armed and vulnerable. The attack, when it comes, is exactly as Walker had predicted. A distraction at the front of the house. 2 riders charging past, firing wildly as Sheriff Reed and his men return fire. Shadows move toward the supposedly unguarded back door. Walker allows himself a small smile as he hears boots on his back porch. The Clayton brothers would be there personally. Men of their reputation wouldn't trust others with the main objective. Through the cellar's acoustic design, another of his ghost hand innovations, he can hear their whispered conversation. "Old man's probably hiding in the bedroom," one voice says. "Check there first." "Remember," another replies, "we need him alive. His reputation is worth more than Blackwood's freedom." Walker's smile widens. They think this is about freeing James. Blackwood. They haven't realized that capturing him had always been their real purpose, proving their dominance by taking down Ghost Hand Walker himself. He moves silently through the tunnel to his chosen position. Above, he hears the back door ease open, bootsteps moving cautiously across his kitchen floor. Everything is proceeding exactly as planned. The Clayton brothers move through Walker's darkened kitchen with the confidence of men who believe they control the situation. Luke Clayton, the taller of the two, carries matching pearl-handled Colts, while his brother Mark holds a short-barreled shotgun. Both move with the fluid grace of seasoned professionals. From his hidden position in the cellar's tunnel network, Walker watches through specially designed viewing ports, narrow holes that he'd drilled and disguised as natural knots in the floorboards. The brothers' expensive boots pass inches from his face as they sweep the house's main floor. "Empty," Mark reports in a whisper, lowering his shotgun slightly. "But recently occupied. Coffee pot is still warm." Luke moves to the front window, carefully staying in the shadows. Outside, the diversionary attack continues, with Sheriff Reed and his men exchanging fire with the Clayton brothers' raiders. The shooting is spectacular, but largely harmless, exactly as Walker had choreographed when he'd given the deputies their instructions. "Old man's got to be upstairs," Luke mutters. "Probably thought we'd hit the front first, like common bandits." Walker smiles in the darkness. The brothers' professional pride is working against them, making them see what they expect. An amateur's defensive strategy. They haven't considered that someone might turn their own professionalism into a weapon. He moves silently through the tunnel to his next position, remembering his commander's words about hunting mountain lions. They're beautiful creatures, but they get predictable when they think they're the hunters. Above, the brothers start up the stairs, their weight making the old wood creak in protest. Walker counts their steps, timing their progress. When they reach the bedroom door, Luke positions himself to one side while Mark takes the other. Their coordination is impressive. Clearly they've done this many times before. "Mr. Walker," Luke calls out, his voice surprisingly gentle. "We know you're in there. Come out now and no one needs to get hurt." Walker triggers the first part of his trap, a simple device that drops a tin cup in the bedroom, creating the sound of someone startling at Luke's voice. "Scared," Mark comments with satisfaction. "Good. Scared people make mistakes." The brothers exchange glances, then Mark kicks in the door. They burst into the bedroom with practiced efficiency, covering all corners. But instead of finding a frightened old veteran, they find only empty darkness and a single lamp burning low. "What the—" Mark starts, but Luke's sharp intake of breath cuts him off. "Look," the older brother says, pointing to the bed. There, laid out with deliberate precision, is a copy of the Blackwood Gang's wanted poster. Scrolled across it in flowing script are the words, "Welcome to my house, gentlemen." Before they can process this, Walker triggers his second trap. The lamp, rigged with a simple timing device, flares suddenly bright before exploding in a shower of glass and kerosene. The brothers instinctively turn away from the flash, giving Walker the moment he needs. He emerges from a concealed panel in the bedroom wall, his Colt rock-steady in his hands. "That's far enough," he says quietly. The Clayton brothers freeze, their weapons half raised. In the chaos outside, no one would have heard the lamp breaking or his entrance. "I have to admit," Luke says, his voice still steady despite the situation, "this is impressive. You used our own methods against us, watching, planning, choosing the ground." "My commander taught me that the best way to hunt a professional is to think like one," Walker replies. "Drop your guns, slowly." Mark's shotgun twitches slightly. "You really think you can take both of us? Even with the drop, one of us will get a shot off." "Look at the floor," Walker suggests. They do, noticing for the first time the thin wires running between their feet. Tripwires connected to something beneath the floorboards. "My ghost hand days taught me to believe in backup plans," Walker explains. "Those wires run to enough black powder to turn this room into splinters. Dead man's trigger. If I fall, my weight releases the mechanism." Luke Clayton actually smiles. "The stories didn't do you justice, Mr. Walker. We thought we were hunting an old veteran who got lucky with Blackwood's gang. Instead, you found someone who's been playing a role far longer than you have," Walker finishes. "Now, about those guns." The brothers exchange one last look, then carefully lower their weapons to the floor. As they straighten, Luke's eyes narrow thoughtfully. "One question, if I may. The wanted poster. You knew we'd come to this room, knew we'd look at the bed first. How?" "Because it's what professionals do," Walker says. "Clear the most likely hiding spot first, control the high ground. You did exactly what your reputation said you would." He allows himself a small smile. "Sometimes the deadliest trap is simply knowing how your opponent thinks." "Our employer won't be pleased," Mark says quietly. Walker's Colt doesn't waver, but his mind races at this new information. "Employer? I was under the impression the Clayton brothers worked alone." Luke laughs softly. "Times change, Mr. Walker. Even professionals need backing these days, especially when the job involves someone of your particular talents." "The Blackwood Gang wasn't enough of a message," Mark adds. "Some people don't appreciate having their plans disrupted." "What people?" Walker demands, but he already suspects the answer. The pieces are falling into place. Blackwood's cryptic warnings, the elaborate setup, the professional gunman. "Ever hear of the Western Territories Investment Company?" Luke asks. "They've been buying up ranches all through Arizona, creating opportunities, as they call it, by running honest ranchers off their land," Walker finishes. His commander had mentioned the company once, warning him about men who use paper and money to steal what they couldn't take by force. "Smart man," Luke nods. "Blackwood's gang was supposed to create enough chaos to drive down land prices, make people eager to sell. But you interfered. Now the company's lost money, lost face. They don't like either. A sound from below, Billy's signal whistle." Walker doesn't take his eyes off the brothers. "Your men are surrendering." "Some of them," Mark agrees. "But I wouldn't get too comfortable, Mr. Walker. The company doesn't stop with one setback. They've got resources you can't imagine. Judges, bankers, territorial officials, all with a vested interest in progress. And progress means running decent. People off their land. Progress means whatever the company says it means," Luke says. "Face it, old man. You're good. Maybe the best gun I've seen. But you can't fight an enemy you can't see, can't shoot." Walker thinks of his commander's lessons about different kinds of battles. Maybe not, but I can expose them. The sound of boots on the stairs, Sheriff Reed and his deputies. But Walker keeps his colt trained on the brothers. Something in their manner bothers him. They're too calm for men who've been captured. One last thing, Luke says as Reed enters. Check the paper in my vest pocket. Consider it a professional courtesy. Reed retrieves the paper carefully, his face darkening as he reads. Walker, it's a warrant. Signed by Judge Morrison himself. For your arrest. The brothers smile in unison. The company, Luke says softly, always has a backup plan. A warrant? Walker keeps his colt steady. On what charges? Interfering with legitimate business interests, Luke quotes smoothly. Destruction of property, threatening company representatives, meaning Blackwood and his boys. And my personal favorite, impersonating a lawman during your ghost hand days. Those bounties you collected? Technically fraud. Walker feels the ground shifting beneath his feet. They've taken his strength, his reputation, his past service, and turned it into a weapon against him. This is ridiculous, Reed growls. That warrant's not worth the paper it's printed on. Signed by a territorial judge, Luke reminds him. Unless you're planning to defy a legal court order, Sheriff. Walker sees the trap now, elegant in its simplicity. If Reed ignores the warrant, he undermines his own authority. If he enforces it, the company gets what it wants. Ghost hand out of the way, his reputation tainted. There's more, Mark adds. Companies offering to drop all charges if Mr. Walker agrees to sell his homestead. Fair market value, of course. After all, who'd want to buy property from someone facing criminal charges? You really think this will work? Walker asks, genuine curiosity in his voice. The brothers exchange glances. It already has, Luke says. Dozen times at least. Company finds someone troublesome, digs up or manufactures some legal trouble, then offers a generous solution. Most folks take the deal, and if they don't, then the legal troubles get worse. Amazing how many witnesses can remember things once there's company money involved. Walker thinks of his commander's words about different kinds of courage. Sometimes, the bravest thing isn't standing and fighting, it's knowing which battles matter most. Sheriff, he says quietly, take their guns. They're still under arrest for attacking your deputies. That warrant doesn't cover tonight's activity. You're making a mistake, Luke warns. The company made the mistake, Walker interrupts. Tell your employers something from me. My commander used to say there are two kinds of fighters, the ones who fight alone and the ones who fight together. The lone ones are dangerous but predictable. It's the ones who band together you have to watch out for. Is that supposed to be a threat? Mark asks. No, Walker smiles. It's a lesson. You see, the company's been operating in the shadows, picking off isolated targets. But what happens when those targets start working together? When every rancher, every homesteader they've pressured starts comparing notes, understanding who's really behind it all? Understanding dawns in Luke's eyes. Blackwood's ledger, the one you took from him, Mark realizes. Records of every payment, every threat, every deal. And now, thanks to you, I know who was really behind it all. Walker turns to Reed. Sheriff, I believe Judge Parker would be very interested in this warrant, particularly how a territorial judge came to sign it without a single sworn complaint. Reed nods, a slow smile spreading under his mustache. Might have to send some telegrams. Let other sheriffs know to check their warrant books carefully. The company will still come after you, Luke warns, but there's respect in his voice now. Probably, Walker agrees. But not the way they planned. Sometimes, gentlemen, the best shot isn't the one you take. It's the one you force your opponent to take. As the sun sets over Ghost Canyon, Thomas Walker stands on his porch, watching the last of the company men being led away. The quiet veteran who tended his garden has found a new kind of battle to fight, One that requires not just a steady hand and a keen eye, but the courage to stand against corruption that wears a respectable face. The legend of Ghost Hand Walker will spread again, not as a story of deadly accuracy, but as proof that when people stand together against injustice, no amount of money or power can stop the truth they reveal. The best shots, after all, are the ones that change everything. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.